I'm super excited about this. Several months ago, we kind of hatched this plan to have this be one of the topics, and I'm just thrilled that we've been able to get the speakers that we have. I think the topic is highly relevant and fits in great with everything else that we've been talking about. It kind of brings all the pieces together. We talk a lot about biking, like when we talk about active transportation and there's biking, and it's almost like they're synonymous. Often we forget about walking. It's not an alternative mode of transportation. It's the original mode of transportation. And we're starting to figure out how to redesign our world for walking again, which is kind of the cute title we came up with. So first we'll hear from Dr. Reed Ewing at the University of Utah. Many of you, if you've been around here and in the industry very long, you know Reed, and he's one of the best minds in the country on correlation of transportation and land use, and he'll be our first speaker. And followed by Callie New, who is a Wyoming girl who studied in New York and found the perfect fusion of country and city here in Salt Lake, and we're just thrilled to have her here. And she's a planner at the Wasatch Front Regional Council. And then we'll finish off with Laura Clayton, who is an architect who has a strong understanding of, which is rare for an architect, has a great understanding and cares a lot about how the buildings impact the public spaces. And so I'm thrilled that she's able to join us, and we'll have some great insights for us. And then we'll have some time at the end. We're actually going to bring up some examples of streets throughout the region and talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and how we can make our streets better for walking. So with that, Reed.
Well, thank you all for attending, and thanks, John, for putting this session together. So we're going to be talking about urban design qualities and the relationship of these qualities to pedestrian activity. This is actually now a kind of old, 2005 report that was done by the Institute of Medicine and Transportation Research Board. Does the built environment influence physical activity? The evidence is overwhelming that it does. We're going to go through the D variables. For those of you who've taken my course, you better know these. Okay, so the first one is density. Second one, diversity, land use diversity. Third one, design, street network design. Fourth one, destination accessibility. Fifth, distance to transit. Now, all these D variables, and there are a couple of others as well. Demand management is actually parking management. These D variables we know from 30 years worth of research affect people's travel behavior, including whether they walk and bike. Okay, so those are the D's. But the D's, when you think about it, density, you picture high-rise building. That by itself is not necessarily going to have a lot of effect on your experience as a pedestrian, walking past that. So the D's, which are kind of gross qualities of the built environment, don't tell the whole story. Now we know that walking does increase with density and with land use mix, when you have a better mix of land uses, and with smaller blocks and so on, but that still doesn't capture the kind of micro environment. So you probably, how many of you are planners? Yeah, so almost everyone. So you know these. You remember Christopher Alexander's pattern language, Alan Jacobs' Great Streets, and these are the the big thinkers of our field. And notice that they go back a ways. Kevin Lynch, the 1950s and 60s at MIT, and they said that the experience of place actually depends on subtler qualities than gross density or than land use entropy. And so I'm going to talk about those subtle qualities. And the first one, and this is from Lynch's book, The Image of the City, is called imageability. I think he coined the term. It's a quality of space that makes it distinct, recognizable, and memorable. So it's a country called Plaza in the upper left, and that is a very imageable place. I took this shot, and I still remember it as though I was there yesterday. And why is it? Well, it appeals to all the senses, sight, smell, sound, etc. Enclosure is a second quality that urban designers think makes a difference. When buildings and trees and so on enclose street space and make street space more into what they call an outdoor room, they believe that people are more comfortable in the environment that is semi-enclosed by walls, buildings, trees, and so on. So that's the second one. And if you compare these two images, the one on the upper left, of course, is more enclosed. Now that may be not sufficiently enclosed. One on the lower right, which is Sarasota, much less so. And it doesn't read as well. It doesn't feel as well when you're there. So you don't want the upper left hand corner. You don't want that necessarily. That's not enclosed space. But maybe you don't want it overly enclosed, and you all recognize this as Manhattan. Transparency refers to the degree to which people can see or perceive what lies beyond the edge of the street. You often hear the term windows on the street as a quality that defines transparency, but it's actually more than that, as you'll see in just a second. And so, these are two images, both with windows on the street and both transparent. The upper left is interesting. That's Boston. That's the public library downtown. And notice it's a blank wall for the pedestrian, upper left. And the kind of interesting contrast is right around the corner from it, where people painted windows on the side of a building to make it seem more transparent, I guess. Human scale refers to the size, texture, etc., that match the size and proportion of us. Humans, we're small, buildings are big, streets are wide, and so on. So a human scale is smaller scale, and not just to matching our physical dimensions, but also the speed at which we travel. We travel slowly, 3 or 4 miles an hour, versus an automobile at 45 miles an hour. It's a very different thing. It's irrelevant almost at 45 miles an hour what the street environment looks like. I'm not saying the street itself, but the environment, whereas for the pedestrian it's all important. So I'm looking down, this is Reston Town Center, looking down from, I think it's the 12th story, and was surprised that they built a building that tall in Reston Town Center in contrast to Park Avenue in Winter Park, which is 2-story, which is more of a human scale. And then I'm showing you a couple of images. The In-N-Out Burger, that's Las Vegas, where the sign is bigger than the building. And then Hyde Park Village in Tampa, where you've got small-scale signage in the lower right that matches the size and speed of pedestrians. And parking, small scale, that's Davis, lower right. A little bit of parking in front isn't necessarily a disaster versus a large parking lot. And even public art. The monumental art in the upper left, that's Richmond. And lower right is Atlanta. Complexity is the fifth quality I'm going to talk about. Refers to visual richness of an environment. It depends on the number of distinct elements, buildings and street furniture, and so on, the variety of the physical environment, and signage and landscape elements that exist. And so you've got two highly complex environments there. Lower right is Denver, and we want complexity, but we want it to be coherent. So the lower right, this is San Jose, is less coherent street space than the upper left. The trees create a more coherent and a more complex environment. The buildings speak to one another. They share design elements. So those are the 5 qualities, and at the end of this, we'll go over them again, and hopefully you've got them. So we did something for the. Yeah, I just met someone from Sacramento who runs the sustainability office for the county, and they have a health orientation. We did this work for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which is the largest health-oriented foundation in the country, and they funded a lot of research. The fact we have an active living kind of theory and practice now is a result largely of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the decision they decided to promote active living. After they'd finished the smoking wars, they said, we've got an obesity epidemic, a lot of chronic diseases. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to see if we can get environments to be more conducive to physical activity. And the lieutenant governor talked about that in his talk at lunch. So I'm not going to go into great detail on our work plan, but we narrowed from 41 qualities, perceptual qualities that designers think are important. We narrowed it down to 8. We brought in some top urban designers and planners to look at video clips. This was the most, the best, highest values for this of any of the video clips. The 48, we showed them. This is Annapolis, and it is. Let's do it. Okay, it's imageable. It's enclosed, complex, transparent. Linkage is another one. And it's very much human scale. Okay, and then this is San Francisco, and it's got some of the qualities, but not all of them. And this turns out was the worst of the 48. This is designed to be a pedestrian environment. We didn't choose a commercial strip in the suburbs somewhere. This is Rockville, but it's not complex, it's not imageable, and so on. Okay, so then we estimated models using, we did for the 48 video clips that the experts rated, we did a content analysis. We measured 120 things about each of the environments, and then we did some modeling. This is, when we say modeling, we mean mathematical modeling, and it turned out that transparency, their ratings on transparency depended on the proportion of the first floor facade made up of windows, and the proportion of active uses, and the proportion of the street that formed a street wall with continuous facades. So those were the 3 things that they said, that they decided led to a transparent streetscape. These 3 things, which you can measure, and that's the key to this, the ability to measure these things. So we created a field manual with the 5 qualities, imageability, etc. This is what the field manual looks like. It's been used now a fair amount to do this kind of research. Anyone recognize the upper right? Yeah. So that was highly imageable, and anyone recognize the lower right? You don't. It's absolutely anonymous. And then we provided directions on how to measure and count things. So non-rectangular buildings, facades, were a quality that turned out to be important for imageability. So how do you measure that? And so we completed the project, and Columbia University, Kathy Neckerman, excuse me, followed up, and they measured these qualities for 588 street segments in New York City, and they did pedestrian counts and found out that imageability and transparency were both significant predictors of pedestrian traffic. Okay? That's after controlling statistically, and this is as technical as this is going to get, but you have to take into account other things like floor area ratio. So the number of pedestrians depended on floor area ratio. It depended on walk score. It depended on all these other things that you see at the top, but it also depended on imageability and transparency. So now, finishing up, measuring urban design, Salt Lake City study. We did our study in the pre-fair zone downtown, and we spent a half an hour counting pedestrians on each of these block faces, and we spent literally weeks measuring things, measuring the number of planters and the height of buildings and all of these other things on 179 block faces. And this shows the pedestrian traffic. And look at how different pedestrian, the darker the red, the more pedestrians. Look at how much variation there is. It's from zero, essentially zero pedestrians in a half-hour period to hundreds of pedestrians. Almost 1,000 was the highest. And so here we have a street that ranked fairly high. This is Main Street for imageability. Human scale, particularly on the left side on Broadway, human scale. Interestingly enough, the 200 South had a lot of street furniture, which added to human scale. Enclosure, you see two semi-enclosed spaces. We're not enclosed the way Manhattan is, but we do have streets that are more enclosed by buildings, creating more of the outdoor room effect. Transparency, you can see the display windows, and you can see the buildings lined up one after another, forming a street wall, which was another quality. Complexity, that's Main Street again. Main Street proved to be the best street. And then high on all 5 qualities. So that shows all of the ones we talked about. The buildings are complex, architecturally, it's imageable, etc. Okay, and this is the lowest. So North Temple is the lowest in terms of these things. And you say, well, yeah, it doesn't have buildings on that side of the street. Well, we controlled for that statistically. So we measured the D variables for a quarter mile around each of the block faces. So we knew floor area ratio, this measure of entropy, which is the mix of land uses, intersection density, walk score, and so on. And then we did a regression, which you probably all studied in school, which most of you are planners. This is a regression analysis, and you can see once again imageability and transparency are significant predictors of pedestrian traffic after you control for all those other things, percentage of four-way intersections, distance to transit, which was distance to tracks, and so on. Okay? So wrapping up, so we found that in both studies, the two, transparency and imageability, were important. Imageability, by the way, is measured in terms of historic buildings, percentage of historic buildings. It's measured in terms of courtyards and public spaces along the street, and so on. Enclosure and complexity, oddly enough, we expected them to predict pedestrian activity. They didn't. We're doing additional work in other cities, and other people are doing them. One with a person just completed a study like this in Scotland using the methodology. And as a whole, these urban design qualities matter. So planners tend to focus on FAR and so on, but these are also important. And then finally, the last image is from a book that I wrote with Keith Bartholomew, whom the students know well. He's the associate dean in our school at the University of Utah. We're in architecture and planning, and we wrote this book together for ULI, which has a booth downstairs. It's called Pedestrian and Transit-Oriented Design, and it's a how-to book. How do you create these places where people want to be and want to be more physically active? Thank you.
Thank you, Reed. So that was like a 2-hour presentation that he was willing to condense down to 15 minutes for us. Well done.
I'm not a very good millennial because I don't know how to go full screen mode, but we'll get there. Okay. So today, my presentation, I'm going to go through why the effort, why are we measuring all of this data, and then I will explain the WFRC story map and our data collection effort that we did as an agency across the Wasatch Front using Reed's methodology. I'm going to give an overview of the data and give a walk through the urban design elements to kind of bring the data to life and give local examples of what these elements mean, and then a brief discussion of the role of public space in supporting walkability. I would like to center the conversation around the question of how can we transform streetscapes to make them more comfortable and welcoming. So imagine walking here. What does it feel like to be here? Today it probably feels really hot. Your end destination feels really far. You're thinking, what did I do to get here? How do I get myself out of here? Your phone is dead and you can't call an Uber and you can't call a friend. You don't want to be here, but why? If we continue on this, if we continue on this current trend, we are kind of setting ourselves up to be sitting in traffic for a good chunk of our lives. I don't want to do that. I want to be able to walk to the store, to dinner, to lunch with a friend. I want to live my life outside of my car. But with that being said, walkability has little to do with driving. Meaning to improve the walkability of an area does not mean that we stop allowing cars to drive or want to do away with them whatsoever. They're a necessary thing in our society. That's not the point. The point is to create another option, one that is natural, easy, safe, and within our nature as humans. Our first steps are one of our biggest milestones is development as little kids. It's a natural thing, it costs nothing, and it's good for us. And Utahns have proven that with adequate infrastructure and quality urban design, they do desire to walk over driving. These images look quite different than the one shown before. What is different about these images? Can we talk about it? The framework just laid out by Professor Ewing gives us not only the language to talk about these elements that contribute to walkability, but also we now have data that measure these as well. And I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes talking about that. Because as discussed in this previous presentation, it does work. We do want to walk. We just need to recognize what isn't working and improve those areas. And it's not just Main Street, Salt Lake City. It's State Street in Clearfield. It's Wasatch Boulevard, 900 West, Sago Lily Drive, 5600 West, Redwood Road. In 5, 10, and 20 years, we aren't going to want to drive. It will be so congested. We need to create options for mobility. We're growing. It's coming. But if we continue to plan for people to drive, that's what they're going to do. So how do we enhance this other inherently human option? So using Reed's methodology and urban design field guide, WFRC hired 2 interns to pound the pavement scoring the streets. Rain or shine, they collected data for over 1,200 blocks across the Wasatch Front. And we now have a shareable data set and associated story map, which is found on our website, wfrc.org, in the interactive map gallery. So to orient you with the map a little bit, we have the overall score, which is calculated based on all of the 5 elements. And then you can go through these tabs, imageability, enclosure, human scale, etc., to see how each score ranked in each of the 5 elements. So I'm going to walk through the elements showing strong local examples across the Wasatch Front and sharing their associated score for each of the elements, like I said, to bring the data to life a little bit. And also, I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to show some images from a trip I took to Copenhagen last week. After hearing so much about how walkable and bikeable Copenhagen is as a city, I wanted to see for myself, how could one city have 70% of all trips be taken by walking or biking? It's incredible. And then I discovered that their population statistics are quite similar to ours. The city itself has 500,000 people, and the metro region has 2 million. So I wanted to see what are they doing differently and what can we learn. I spent almost all of my time just walking around and seeing what it's like to walk and bike. I didn't go to the city center because I didn't want to see the best example. I wanted to see neighborhoods, and so I did neighborhood-like things. And these images are of normal, everyday retail and housing corridors. And the point of showing these images isn't to say, look how cool this other place is, but more so to learn and explore other ideas, to draw inspiration, and maybe even imagine something we might never have. The urban design data can bring us so many great insights, but I believe that change really happens when we use the data as a starting point and then look at the context to examine how people are interacting with their city and begin having conversations about how to make it better. So here we go. So imageability. This example is from Holiday, 2300 East. So imageability refers to the memorability of the place, as Reed said. In Holiday, you might tell your friend, hey, let's meet on that street with the black and white squares designed near 2300 East. We can walk around and find a bite to eat from there. You know what I'm talking about because no other street in the Wasatch Front has these squares. In Copenhagen, you might say, oh, I'm at that building across the canal with the giant inn on it. Or I remember I parked my bike against the building with the chickens on it near St. So-and-so's Cathedral. You know exactly what I'm talking about when I describe this place to you, and you can imagine it. Enclosure can best be described as the room-like quality of the street. This example is from Midvale. As you walk down Main Street in Midvale, you're not overly exposed. There are coverings to protect you from the sun or the rain, and there aren't long stretches where you'll be walking without a building beside you. It feels safer to walk when you have this strong sense of enclosure. Lighting and transparency of buildings also contribute to this, of course. This example in the neighborhood of Amagerbro in Copenhagen feels the same way, just at a slightly denser scale. Human scale, this example is from 300 South in Salt Lake City. And I think of human scale as whether or not the signage on buildings I am visiting are legible to me as I walk down the street. Are there signs that I might miss if we were going 30 miles an hour? Are there places I can sit and enjoy if need be? 300 South in Salt Lake is a great example of this. The stores have a small footprint, there are many of them, and they are spaced close together. This also has an advantage for the businesses. If I go to one, I might as well stop in a few more, since I'm already there. Again, the neighborhood of Nørrebro in Copenhagen captures this idea well, and this area has come to be known specifically for good antique shops, and more flea markets, restaurants, and demand for residential units have popped up. If you go to Nørrebro to visit one shop, you'll visit several. You can read the signs and you're intrigued to check them out. Economic development and walkability go hand in hand. Transparency, the example is in Magna. So transparency refers to how well you can perceive human activity beyond the edge of a street or a public space. This building in Magna allows you to see inside the business, to know that there are people inside working, selling, or creating something. You feel safer as you walk along the street knowing this. You might even be intrigued to enter the business. And an example in the neighborhood of Christiana. So complexity, this is 25th Street in Ogden. It can be described as the visual richness of a place, the variety of buildings, colors, architectural diversity, public art, signage, landscaping. 25th Street has a variety of public art, including horse statues, a piano, and great landscaping. These images of the Nørrebro neighborhood show a variety of architectural buildings at different scales on the right. And then on the left, you can see one storefront has public seating, landscaping, and a number of images to look at. You can't help to go inside and to look more. So that's a brief overview of the elements, and then to talk about public space a little bit. As this quote alludes, walkability is not just about one of these elements in isolation, nor is it about just density or retail. It's also about housing, it's also about local shops, and also it's undeniably about public space. It's a holistic arena. And we cannot just use data engineering and aerial photography to make it happen. as great as these things are, and they're a great starting point, we can use this data to identify the areas that need improvement and specify which elements within this framework need help. And with this framework provided by Professor Ewing, we now have the language to talk about it, which is a great starting point. But we must also get on the ground to see how people interact with the city. The possible benefits are huge. So what possibilities are provided through these interactions? Shopping and eating, definitely. Enjoying the sunshine, being sheltered from the rain. But what else? Socializing, creating meaningful relationships, learning. Could be about courting. It could be about play. What are the possibilities presented to us when we walk down our streets? These are our spaces. We collectively share them. What do we want in them? What could we imagine for our public streets and our public spaces if we didn't know the rules? Thank you.
I have the same problem. Wait. Oh no. Sorry. No. Okay. So I appreciate being here with you today. I am an architect with Tech Design Group. The way I got involved with the urban design community is that I was always highly focused on sustainability when I was in school, just as a value and an interest and a passion. And then when I got my master's degree from the University of Utah, I got a job with a very sustainable firm that I loved working with. The building was beautiful. But unfortunately, I found myself in my car for an hour a day, and I found myself having to drive 20 minutes if I wanted to go to lunch. Going outside was unpleasant because of the road it was on. And there were just all kinds of issues. And I started to realize, I mean, I know you've all seen the pie chart of, a third is the building, a third is transportation, a third of, our pollution as industry. And I know it fluctuates. But it started to resonate with me that no matter how sustainable you are as an architect, if you're not sited correctly and you're not enhancing walkability and public transportation and issues of public space and urbanism, then you're really just adding to the problem. So I feel very strongly about that, and I've been fortunate enough to be included in this discussion, so I appreciate that. Let's see if I can do this. So my very first assignment when I went to architecture school as an 18-year-old was to draw a square, and then after we drew the square, we were supposed to infill the square with a pattern. This was not my pattern. I wish it was my pattern, but I didn't quite get it at the time. But the idea was that what happens inside your square should be able to extend beyond the square. And so that was the very first lesson that we learned. And this stuck with me and still stays with me as, what makes a good space, like what makes good design. Like every instance should be a part of the whole. And unfortunately, a lot of architects see a building like this. And I was fortunate enough to be involved in some park charrettes last year, and I sat on a review with a site design, not at the University of Utah, but at another school. I was involved with a review, and I thought, oh, this is great. These kids are going to really get context, space, and what I was seeing was this. So they were designing the yard, or the block, but they were just sort of doing a square for where the building was, and I thought this is really a problem, because what we really need to be doing is this, and so that's why when I saw this study that Rita's put together with the help of very talented people about these qualities of design. I mean, these are all architectural qualities, and I think that every architect and every landscape architect and every transportation engineer needs to be aware of these qualities. And based on my diagram that I showed you, I would also include continuity in that as a desired quality. So it's been my experience in America that we are a highly specialized community, industry. The architect designs the building. You know, there's a street. The street's doing some wonderful things. We've got bike lanes. We've got, you know, improvements. You know, then you hand it off to the landscape architect, and they, you know, put in some vegetation, and hopefully all these things are working together. But you know, I feel like the opportunities are really on the edges, or where these disciplines intersect, and that you know, in other countries, the people, the industry's not. Some countries are not quite as specialized as us, so there is more of an overlap and more of a dialogue. But I feel like the way that we work here, we're not always seeing things as, you know, one holistic issue. So I think that this work that we're doing, this discussion we're having today, is really great, and I'd like to talk about more, you know, how we can move forward in that way. So so I took this map and I studied it, and I came up with 3 case studies in our city that I thought really exemplified sort of a cross-disciplinary approach to design, and you know, started to take advantage of these intersections and these edges. The first one, you probably know. I was not involved with this, but I love this space. This is the current. It's the corner of 300 South, 300 East, and it's that corner where the current oyster bar and fish and oyster bar restaurant is. And what I really love about this is that, you know, the architect, that was designed by Prescott Muir Architects, and they took, you know, this existing building and did an adaptive reuse intervention. But beyond that, you know, you have, you know, the access to the bikes, the green bikes. You have the access to the bike lane. You know, you have this imageability. And I was just there. This was on a Sunday, so a Sunday everything's closed, and there were people on skateboards. There were people walking by. There were people. I mean, everybody's walking on this corner. And I love to ride my bike down the street, and during the winter when they have the fire going, and just I feel like I'm spending a lot of money to eat oysters, but I'm not. That's nice. I feel like I'm part of the party. So here they are, having a nice dinner. And even the signage. I was noticing the signage. I mean, it looks really beautiful against the sky, but the reflection of the signage, you know, goes into the building. So this whole thing is about, you know, placing the program of the building within the shell, so that the shell still exists, but you have that like intermediate space of public space before, you know, you get into the private space. So, and I love this here, where, you know, you're on this corner and you can look through, you know, the private dining and see the bikes. I just think that's really effective. And then it goes somewhere, you know, like if you have all these paths and these bike lanes and they don't actually go somewhere, then they're not really working. And then if you have this wonderful restaurant and you can't get there, it's not really working. So I feel like, you know, this is really a great example of a cross-section of qualities. So the next element I'd like to talk about is the wide street solution, or how we're dealing with our wide streets. So I work here now on Exchange Place with Babcock Design Group, and we don't have a plaque on our wall. We are not LEED certified, which I'm working on. But in fact, I don't have to drive to work when it snows. I don't have to drive to work ever. If I choose not to, I can ride my bike. We have a room to put a bike. We actually don't have a gym because there's a gym right next door. We work 4 9s and 1 4, and so we kind of have a long work day. So every day at 3:30 we take a walk, and we walk around. We walk up Main Street, and then sometimes we go farther than other times. But you know, it's always really great to get out of the office, and you know, it really improves our quality of life and improves our work. You know, we get to talk about things that we need to talk about. So We're going to talk about why we go up the, what's happening on Main Street, what's happening on 3rd that I think are really powerful, and then what's happening over here at the Granary Row, and how these spaces are, this is dealing with our wide street challenge. So this is a case study of Las Ramblas in Barcelona. I was fortunate enough to study there when I was an undergrad, and I lived a half a block from Las Ramblas. And I never went to the gym, but I walked all the time, and I felt great. I was happy all the time. But what's really interesting about Las Ramblas is it's pretty much the same size as our streets, but it has, it utilizes this infill, this media. And then the other example, and so, when I moved to Utah, we didn't have these interventions, and I wondered, where's the downtown? Like, my friends would come visit, and they'd say, where are the people? I thought this was a big city, and I was kind of embarrassed, and I was like, well, I think we need to, do something about our streets. So now we are, which is great. And then this is actually the town where I'm from. I'm from Greenville, South Carolina, and they did a downtown revitalization in the 90s. So I was lucky enough to spend a lot of, every time I go home, everybody goes downtown. Like, the Main Street's great. And what they did is they basically just pushed all the dining to the street. And there's lots of trees because it's Greenville. So, but anyway, it's great, and it's really successful. So something that's been working in Salt Lake is that the architecture community and the landscape community have been doing these parklets. So this is an example of the garden stroll that occurred last year on Main Street. I think the Women in Architecture sponsored this one. But it's about, obviously about bringing, that built space to the street edge. This is another one. And then this is one that we did in 2013. This was a parking day that we did in the 21st Business District, which was, I think, this effort, the parking day effort, is September 15th every year, and basically you can take over a parking stall and build a park in it. And so this sort of movement started the parklet movement and the guidelines for that. And then I think that, here's our parklet that we did, and I think that was what was sort of, one of the influencers to start, getting these restaurants to start looking at the street instead of pushing things back. And then Granary Row, I just think what they've done there is amazing. It's a little out of the way, but it's still, what they've done is really cool. So, and here they are with the shipping containers and these festivals that they have. And, so this was a solution that came out of the Granary Charrette, which hasn't been implemented, but I think there's some dialogue about actually infilling the middle of the street with buildings. So I think those are all strong examples of how the design community can think beyond the edges. And so the last thing I want to talk about really fast is opportunities for continuity. And my favorite building in Salt Lake is the Salt Lake City Public Library. And what I love about this building is, actually, if I have an opportunity to walk through this block, I'll walk through this block versus around, or I'll walk through the library. I would never drive there if I can help it. But the reason being, it's just a beautiful building. And I think that's, we all, I think most people really like this building. But, this is the power of this building. This is the power of the interior and, how it connects to the exterior. And people are always walking in. And the building itself is actually solving the problem of our blocks, because you can cut through the block by going through the building. So I just think here it is at a festival, and here was the arts festival last weekend. So in conclusion, we've been talking about imageability, enclosure, human scale, transparency, and complexity, and continuity. But what I'd really like to take back to the architecture community are, to you guys is how, how we can start working within our systems, like beyond our systems, so that we can start, so that people are thinking in this way, so people are aware of what's beyond the edge of your discipline. So, and with that, I'll give it to John.
See, I told you, best session. All right. We've got about 10 minutes. We could probably squeeze in a couple questions before we jump into actually picking some streets apart. Here we go. Got some quick hands.
So you mentioned walkability, and you also mentioned what we how they have a lot of bikes involved. Does the walkability of the streets directly lead to increased biking as well? And with or without?
Okay, so speaking of streets where maybe you wouldn't feel comfortable driving 45 miles an hour, here's Main Street. So in Bountiful, great Main Street. If you go just a quarter mile or so, half mile to the north, it starts to feel a lot differently. So I'm going to ask our panelists just really quick, what are some of the reasons why you feel a lot more comfortable walking here than, say, the sidewalk on the right here? Or maybe we should open up to the audience. Let's see how well we've trained everyone. What's missing here? Okay, yeah, that's probably the biggest thing, right? Without enclosure, you really can't do any of the other stuff. So you have this big sign, parking lot. The personal pet peeve: the trees are on the wrong side of the sidewalk, over here on the right. They don't do any good there. They need to give you a buffer between the. Right. Okay, so in a couple minutes we have left here. Ogden 25th Street. So you have the painted horses and the piano players and the awnings and the cool 3-story with the clock. Not very far away, you have Wall Avenue. So what's wrong with Wall Avenue? What does Wall Avenue need? You got decent enclosure, right? You got the whole street wall there. Even the gas station or whatever that thing is.
So if I could, yeah. So Christopher Alexander and Willie Mays White and so on, these giants in our field, they have opined on what constitutes enclosure. That's not enclosure. That's not enclosed street space. It is also not complex street space. Street space. It's very, very simple. There's very few individual objects or planes or buildings that create complexity. So that's also very important.
So monotone building, the ratio's wrong, too wide, too low, too boring. Well, one trick that helps is the street trees do provide. They can help quite a bit. So you can narrow the pavement and put street trees between the sidewalk and the street. Right. That's one thing that is very doable. Right here. It's the ratio's off. Right. Yeah, and the humans, that hurts the human skill too, right? Because you don't want to cross. So this is, I think, an example of you're driving 45 miles an hour, you don't really care because it's all coming past you so fast. Anyway, one last thing, and then I think we're out of time. Yes, I think a form-based code is maybe one of the better things. Well, yeah, let's come talk with Lonnie here, and just the fact that we're here having this conversation, keep coming to these sorts of things. We're figuring it out. We're trying to, it's a tough egg to crack, and we're doing it. Can we do one last round of applause? Thank you, everyone. Sorry, I don't have another hour.